Listen. Listen to the voice in your head that is reading these words along with me. That inner monologue, your narrator. Where does it come from? You probably think of it as the very core of who you are, the seat of your consciousness. Now, what if I told you that for most of human history, nobody had it? What if, for thousands of years, humans walked the earth without an inner monologue, without introspection, without what we call consciousness? And what if, instead of an inner voice, they heard something else entirely, the audible, commanding voices of gods, telling them what to do? This isn't a myth. This is a radical, terrifying scientific theory called the bicameral mind, and it suggests that the you think you are is a very recent invention. The theory, proposed by psychologist Julian Jaynes in 1976, is as elegant as it is shocking. Jaynes argued that until about 3,000 years ago, the human brain was split into two distinct parts, a master and a servant. The left hemisphere was the servant, handling day-to-day tasks, but in moments of stress or novelty, it couldn't make a decision. It would call for help. And the right hemisphere, the master, would answer. It would generate an auditory hallucination, a clear, commanding voice which the conscious I would perceive not as its own thought, but as the external voice of a god, a king, a dead ancestor, or a divine ruler. These were not metaphorical gods. These were literal, audible commands that shaped every aspect of life. You didn't times decide times to go to war. A god's voice times commanded times you to. Jaynes found his first piece of evidence in the oldest piece of Western literature, Homer's Times Iliad asterisk. Read it carefully. None of the heroes, not Achilles, not Hector, ever sit down and think. They don't introspect. They don't weigh their options. They are remarkably unconscious. When Achilles is about to draw his sword in a fit of rage, he doesn't calm himself down. A goddess, Athena, physically appears behind him, unseen by others, and tells him what to do. The gods are not just inspirations, they are external neurological triggers for action. The heroes of the Iliad are not conscious individuals. They are automatons, puppets whose strings are pulled by the hallucinatory voices they call gods. This theory suddenly explains so much about the ancient world that seems bizarre to us. Why were ancient civilizations obsessed with idols and statues? Because these statues were not just art, they were focal points, amplifiers for the bicameral voice. An empty throne in a throne room wasn't just symbolic. It was a space for the invisible, hallucinated God King to sit and issue commands. It explains divination and oracles. Casting lots, reading entrails, or listening to the oracle at Delphi were not just superstition. They were techniques to generate novelty and stress, to trigger a command from the God side of the brain when the human side was stuck. It explains why ancient laws were always handed down from a god on a mountaintop. They were not human inventions. They were perceived as divine dictation. So what happened? Why don't we hear these voices anymore? Jaynes points to a period of immense global chaos around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age collapse. Massive volcanic eruptions, famines, migrations, and the breakdown of old empires created a world that was too complex and chaotic for the old bicameral system. When societies of a few thousand people suddenly became multicultural melting pots of hundreds of thousands, the old, simple commands from the gods were no longer enough. There were too many new gods, too many new stresses. The voices became a cacophony of madness instead of a clear guide. The system broke. Humanity was thrown into a state of neurological crisis. The gods fell silent. Out of the ashes of this collapse, a new survival mechanism had to be invented, A new software had to be written for the human brain. If there were no external voices to guide us, we had to create in times internal times one. This was the birth of consciousness as we know it, the birth of the I. Humans learned to create a metaphorical mind space, a narrative of a self that could look at the past, plan for the future, and talk to itself to make decisions. The voice of God was replaced by the internal monologue. We see this shift happening in texts across the world. The Old Testament transitions from prophets who hear God's literal voice to those who interpret written law. In Greece, Homer's Times Odyssey asterisk, written just a few generations after the Times Iliad asterisk, features a hero, Odysseus, who is cunning, lies, introspects, and schemes. He is the first modern man. He has a self, but did the bicameral mind truly die? Or does it still haunt us? James argued that we see its vestiges, its ghosts, everywhere. Auditory hallucinations in schizophrenia are not a malfunction, but a throwback, the right hemisphere trying to reassert its ancient authority over the left. Religious prophecy, the experience of hearing God's voice, is not a delusion, but a temporary activation of this bicameral pathway. What about artistic inspiration? The ancient Greeks called it the muse, a divine external entity that breathed poetry and music into the artist. Isn't this just a beautiful name for the creative, non-verbal right hemisphere sending a fully formed idea to the language-based left hemisphere? The eureka moment that feels like it came from nowhere? That's the ghost of the bicameral voice. Hypnosis, where the will of the hypnotist seems to replace our own inner voice, is another powerful example. The old neural pathways are still there, dormant, waiting to be reawakened. Decades after Jane's, neuroscience has given us some startling, circumstantial evidence. Studies of split brain patients whose left and right hemispheres have been surgically disconnected are particularly revealing. In these patients, the two halves of the brain act like two separate people. The right hemisphere can see and react to things that the left hemisphere is completely unaware of. Famously, if you show the right hemisphere an instruction like walk, the patient will get up and start walking. But when you ask the language-based left hemisphere, why are you walking? It doesn't know the real reason. It will instantly invent a plausible story. Oh, I'm going to get a soda. The left brain's narrator, our ego, is a master of creating narratives to explain actions it doesn't understand. This is exactly what James proposed. The left brain interprets the commands of the right brain as coming from an external, authoritative source. Furthermore, scientists have located Wernicke's area in the left hemisphere, crucial for understanding language. And they have found its counterpart in the right hemisphere. This right side area is not involved in literal language, but is highly active during emotional prosody, metaphor, and music. It's the part of the brain that understands the time spirit asterisk, not the letter of communication. It is a perfect candidate for the part of the brain that could generate a divine voice, authoritative, emotional, and metaphorical. The neural hardware for the bicameral mind is demonstrably there. Now, we must be rational skeptics, just as James was. The bicameral mind theory is not mainstream science. It is a speculative, grand, and largely unfalsifiable hypothesis. Most historians and neuroscientists do not accept it as a literal explanation of the past. There is no smoking gun, no ancient skull we can scan to prove it. But its power lies not in whether it's literally true. Its power lies in the revolutionary question it forces us to ask. What if consciousness, Our precious inner monologue is not a fundamental property of life, but a learned cultural construct, a piece of mental software we all started running a few millennia ago. This idea has profound implications. If our inner voice is just a tool we invented, it means we are not our inner voice. We are the silent awareness times behind times that voice. This is the core teaching of mindfulness and many forms of meditation. To quiet the narrator, to stop identifying with the endless stream of thoughts, and to rest in the silent, observing consciousness that lies beneath. The goal is not to go back to being a bicameral automaton. The goal is to evolve further, to integrate both sides, to have the powerful storytelling eye of the left hemisphere, but to also have access to the silent, intuitive, holistic wisdom of the right hemisphere without it needing to be a voice of God, to be both the character in the story and the author. The voice in your head is a beautiful, powerful, and sometimes dangerous tool. It allowed us to build civilizations, write symphonies, and travel to the moon. But it is not you. It is a story you learned to tell yourself. The ultimate mystery, then, is not what the gods said to our ancestors. The ultimate mystery is what we might discover if we, just for a moment, could finally convince our own inner narrator to be silent and just listen.